readers, this is I, Dark Symphony 777. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications. Join my Discord. There'll be a link to that in the description below, and like and comment on the comment section below on your thoughts on the video and any future fan fictions you want me to read or review. Now, as you can see on the screen, I'm not actually on fanfiction.net. I'm actually on FictionPress.com, which is actually fanfiction's sister site. They're actually owned and run by the same people. They're actually like that. See all my other stuff right here. I'm reading the mole again, mole. So I wanted to do something different and go onto another website other than like fanfiction or FIM fiction. That one time I went to DeviantArt, mainly because I don't trust DeviantArt. I don't just trust that website. It's so hard to see if a story is complete or not. It's really hard. Sorry, I just heard a noise and I didn't know what it was, and I went to investigate it. So, I wanted to do another story. The next big review after the mole will be another story from another website that I actually frequent. But that one's gonna be like, I have to figure out what I'm gonna do with that one. So, let's get started. So the story is called The Ghost of Marianne. It's written by Spaced Out Ghost. It's a supernatural. Unlike fanfiction, who organizes everything by what section it is, like Mario stories or Kingdom Hearts stories or Naruto stories, FictionPress is more streamlined and it's more based around genres. Like if you click on right here, you'll see, fiction and poetry, and then you have like stuff like supernatural, western, stuff like that. It's all categorized by general genres of stories rather than, sections. So the story is Ruby is a ghost mad fanatic. Thinks it would be fun to take her 3 friends in a supposedly haunted house. Carrie is a skeptic. I have no idea why septic came out of my mouth instead of skeptic. And happy to prove her friends that ghosts don't exist. However, the moment they enter this house, they realize that this night will change everything. Don't worry, patient. Ghosts don't exist. They won't hurt you. Ghosts. Ooh, I had to do it. So let's get started. It's gonna be a long one. I learned. Oh no, it's the first person. Oh no. This is gonna take twice as long now. I may have to do this in 2 parts. I learned long ago that when your eccentric best friend spouts stories about ghosts haunting spooky places, the wisest thing to do is ignore her. That's what I always tried to do, at least. But Ruby never took too well to having her tall tales about ghosts disregarded as fiction. Well, that's because, well, in terms of like supernatural, like ghost stuff, like it's always up in the air. Like there's some things that no matter how hard you try, you just can't explain. Hey Carrie, are you listening? Ruby snapped her fingers in my face. Oi, Caroline! I slapped her small hand away. I'm listening, I yawned. Get on with the stupid story. Ruby grinned at me. Ever the skeptic, Carrie? I rolled my eyes. She's not the only one, Simon said with a smile. I glanced at him, and he winked in my direction. Winky face. Guys, look, this is a really cool story, and it really is true. I raised my eyebrow at the blatant lie. That's what you always say. Ruby Corner has been a supernatural maniac. Ever since the day I met her around the age of 4, she's always had a strange interest in horror films, particularly those related to ghosts. Her and Animo will probably get along just fine. Completely ignoring the fact that I had ever spoken, Ruby continued her story. This story contained the typical old haunted house, angry spirit combination, quite common in ghost stories, and I heard hundreds from Ruby. I was pretty sick of them. A young girl, too young, she fell from a balcony trying to find her lost brother. Her voice had started to take on an eerie tilt. She thought she would be able to see where he was if only she was on higher ground. But because of that foolish naivete, she plunged to her death. Now she haunts the household, and she'll try to kill anyone who enters. But if she were ever able to find her brother, then she would be able to rest in peace. However, I snorted. Expect me to believe any of that stuff? There were such glaring problems. For one thing, why would two young children be wandering around unsupervised in the first place? Because they're kids and they don't listen? I mean, you tell a kid, don't touch that candy bar, the kid's gonna go, touch. Do I have to follow you around all day? Touch. Hey, stop touching those candy bars. Touch. The kids will always do the opposite of what you told them to. Hence why you gotta parent them. Unlike my mom. Ruby carried on as if she hadn't heard me. However, she plans to kill her brother with a knife she carries. The twist? If she hits herself with it, she will disappear, passing on to a world beyond our touch. Really? Asked Danny, curiously, completely hooked. Yes, Ruby nodded, her tone deadly serious. Sure, I mumbled. Honestly, where do you get this stuff from? Stop it, Carrie, yelled suddenly, startlingly. I can prove it. Oh, yeah? How? I know the location of the house, Ruby told me with a determined stamp of her foot. Uh-huh. Come to mine for 11. Say it's a sleepover or sneak out if you have to. I want to go, Danny said eagerly. No matter what, Danny always got excited when it came to Ruby's ghost haunting stories. Despite the fact that they always turned out to be a bitter disappointment. Fine, I muttered unenthusiastically, picking at a broken nail. Me too, Simon added quickly, not wanting to be the chicken. He sounded quiet, which for Simon was not uncommon, but there was something a little odd in the tone of his voice. Okay, before I continue the story, I just thought about it. Simon's the brother. He's the brother. I'm betting that. Ta-da! That's what I'm betting. It's getting late, I pointed out. I think we should be getting home now. Okay, said Ruby. Remember? Yeah, I muttered. Remember? Ruby repeated, being completely overkill as usual. Simon and I left together. I was going round his house for dinner that evening. His maid made the best cottage pie I'd ever tasted, and I just couldn't get enough. Whenever she knew I was coming, she would make it especially. What's up? I asked him as we walked to his house, though I had a feeling I already knew. Nothing. I waited, knowing he would tell me eventually. Simon hated to feel pressured into sharing. It's just he ran a hand through his hair. Made me think about my own sister. What of it? You know Ruby's story was just a load of crap. Don't take it seriously. Simon gazed into the distance, determined not to look at me as he spoke. I know it's stupid, but the story made me think of Marianne. She was looking for me before she was hit by a car. It's completely different, I assured him. Just a sad story, that's all, Simon mumbled, more to himself than me. Ruby tells a lot of sad stories. Emphasis on the sad. It doesn't make him true. Simon laughed at my cynicism. You are a true skeptic, Carrie. Don't you believe in anything? I gave him a pointed look. You know what I mean. I believe it when I see it. Oh well, you never know. Might just be surprised tonight. I elbowed him in the side. Shut up. Let's talk about something else. Okay, Simon waited, anticipating a more interesting topic. Now about your mom's cottage pie, eh? He laughed and elbowed me back. What a fascinating subject, Carrie. I know, right? I'm really looking forward to eating it later. So you tell me every time. It was just Simon and his mom. I believed in superstitions that I would be certain that the Reed family were cursed with bad luck of some kind. Before Simon was even born, his father suffered a heart attack. He was young, healthy, and took good care of himself. Needless to say, it came as quite a shock to everybody. Then there was Marianne, a bright, athletic 16-year-old girl with a promising future, snatched away one night in a tragic accident that reminds you just how fragile life is and how easily it can be taken away. Simon's mom speaks about her late husband and daughter, but she honors their memory by hanging their photographs around the house. As I stared at the half a dozen photographs spread around the sitting room, I thought there was something a little sad about the fact that they never had and never would have a full family photograph. They were placed closely as if to create a makeshift one. That's actually simultaneously sad and creepy. Yes, both. Marianne and her father and Simon and his mother, each child resembling their favorite their respective parents closely. The deceased with their silvery blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes, and the living with bright red hair and dark green eyes. That's even more creepy. I turned to Simon, watching me with raised eyebrows. It means nothing, I assured him. Don't think too deeply about Ruby's stupid story. Simon looked amused. I don't think I'm the one thinking about Ruby's story, he answered. I wasn't. You are wearing a really puzzled expression, similar to the one that you got when we had to examine the symbolism in English. Ridiculous, I muttered. Everything has a reason. Examine everything, you'll never be able to enjoy the simpler things in life. Simon snorted and took a sip from his glass of Pepsi. It better be orange vanilla Pepsi. No, wait. It better be cherry Pepsi. Or vanilla Pepsi. He knows what's good for him. Regular Pepsi is for wimps. I couldn't resist. I think you just don't want to do the work. I just prefer to read for fun, I snipped. When you have to do it for school, it just gets boring. I peered around the doorway and tried to listen to the delightful sound of the microwave timer, signaling the cottage pie was ready to eat. Simon coughed. It distinctly sounded like the word loser. Loser. I ignored him. He didn't understand the joy I held for his mother's cooking, nor did he get that the food wasn't the only thing I looked forward to. I loved how, even though it was just the two of them, meal times were important. They relayed their days to one another or sat in contented silence. They spent time together, and they felt it was essential to do so. It wasn't a tradition my own family was interested in upholding. I wasn't bitter about it. Different families had different routines. My parents worked a lot, my older brother and sister were away at university, and I had extracurricular activities outside of school, not counting amateur ghost hunting. It was nice to have a change, to sit around a dinner table with people who were actually interested in what I was saying. My family were all quite serious, logical people who didn't always have a lot to say. I was not exception. I was not an exception. I liked the quiet most of the time. That was the reason I was friends with someone like Simon. We didn't always have to be having a conversation. Why I was friends with a loudmouth like Ruby Corner, I really didn't know. Another ding sounded from the cottage. Such an exquisite sound. I leaped up quickly. Yes, cottage pie, here I come. And also, I believe a comma should go right here. Simon's mother dropped me off at 8 in the evening, 3 hours before our scheduled sneak-out time. As I said my goodbyes to Simon, I noticed something was still bothering him. I wonder if it was the familiarity of the tale that Ruby had been spinning. We were used to sneaking out since we'd done this before a lot, so I knew it wasn't anything to do with that. He never cared for nor believed in Ruby's silly stories, either, but something had rattled him. I crept out of my house easily. I never had much of a problem. It was Danny who was usually the one who got caught, since he wasn't particularly skilled in the art of subtlety. His parents had frequently caught him, either in a terrible lie or the exact moment he was sneaking out the door. I didn't want to go. I never did, really. All he ever seemed to do was wander around an apartment's haunting site and get a little spooked by the occasional nocturnal animal creeping around in the shadows. It was fun sometimes, not often, but every now and then it felt like a little adventure, even if nothing happened. I knew this wasn't going to be one of those fun little adventures. I felt different. A sense of dread hung over me like a dark storm cloud, and I was dragging my feet as I walked to Ruby's house at a slow pace. It was no surprise to see I was the last to arrive. It made sense for us to meet at Ruby's house because it was central to the rest of us. Ruby preferred to believe it was because she was very much self-proclaimed leader of her small group. Ruby let out a sigh when she saw me. There you are, Carrie. We thought you had chickened out, which would be quite unlike you, non-believer. She grinned, but Ruby actually looked relieved to see me. They all did. Safety numbers, I guess. You would never miss out on the whole I told you so part, huh? Ruby said. I nodded. Of course not. So, you agree? You already know what I'll be saying by the end of the night? Let's go home. No, not tonight. Ruby grabbed my arm as I began to turn around and loosen it through hers. This time, it's me who will be saying I told you so. I got a good feeling about this. Ruby's definition of good feeling was very different from the average person's. Let's go. She was off. Full steam ahead, dragging me behind her. Danny bounced along beside her, and Simon trailed behind with reluctance. Ruby Corner was a force of nature. The rest of us were just caught in the storm. Ruby led us to the outskirts of this town, to the supposed haunted house. To give her some credit, the house was certainly freaky. It was clear nobody had lived there for years. Once the house had been painted white, but now it was mostly a gray color. The paint was cracking all over, and the wooden balcony, the apparent scene of the crime, was rotting away. Each and every window was covered in dust, so even if one of us went up close to peer in, all we would see would be a gray swirl. That is so creepy, shivered in delight. Wow. Oh, look, an old house, I said dryly. Wow. It's so beautiful, Ruby murmured wistfully. Simon remained silent, simply staring at the house, eyes slightly glazed over. You all right there, Simon? Danny asked, nudging him. Simon jumped slightly. Yeah, I'm fine, he answered nervously. So, Ruby rubbed her hands together. Who wants to go in first? Don't you, I grumbled. I wanted to go home. It wasn't the house itself that made me feel nervous. Nor even the fact that it was night. The night was beautiful, the sky was clear, and the stars and the crescent moons could be seen clearly. Not the typical horror movie scenario. Something was still nagging at me. The whole escapade was a bad idea. How about you go in first, Ruby suggested with a smirk. After all, what have you got to be worried about? I glared at her. Oh, I don't know. How about lurking creeps or falling through rotten floorboards to my sudden death? Why doesn't our interbred leader go first? No, you first. I insist. Oh, she insisted, did she? Why? She only grinned. Felt like a trap. I put on what must have been a very obvious fake smile. It would be my pleasure, I told her, holding my head high. Carrie, Simon murmured nervously. Be careful. I glanced back at him. He wasn't staring at me exactly. Rather, he was staring past me, at the freaky-looking house, a concerned expression on his face. In contrast, Danny was particularly bouncing with excitement. Go on then, Ruby said, and I could hear amusement in her voice. What she was amused at, however, I wasn't entirely sure. If this had been some sort of horror film, there would have been some suspense, a dramatic lead-up to the luring goal or ghost. My life didn't quite work that way. I barely passed the threshold of the house when I caught sight of a figure lurking at the end of the hallway. I blinked, but the figure just stared at us. No, not us. It was staring at me. What's wrong, Carrie? Ruby asked, amusement evident in her voice. You look like you've seen a ghost. Couldn't she see it? Ruby was a ghost fanatic. So surely she could see something. She would take advantage of it and try and scare the rest of us. Ruby lived for the screams of the terrified. Actually, Ruby was a little psychotic, and in that moment, I was completely reevaluating my friendship choices. I pointed up ahead where the outline of a person, at least it looked like a person, remained standing, staring at me with glowing eyes. Ruby nudged her shoulder against mine and shoved her way past. Look who is getting into the spirit of things, she pronounced almost proudly. Simon and Danley peered over my shoulder curiously. Simon frowned when he couldn't see what I was seeing. He glanced at me confused. Simon knew my adamant refusal to believe in Ruby's crap, and he certainly knew there was no way I was going to play along. It was official. I was going insane. Ruby had messed with my head one too many times. Ooh, creepy, Danny laughed and batted past me. So much for making me go in first. What's the point? Ruby rubbed her hands together. Okay, let's explore. Where should we go first? She gave a malicious grin. Up the stairs? Yeah, if you want to fall through and plunge to your death, I muttered half-heartedly, still watching the eerie figure out of the corner of my eye warily. It stared back at me. I was probably sure it was smirking, pointed teeth barely visible beneath its lips. The glowing red eyes were fixed on me, even though they were slightly hidden beneath curtains of hair that resembled the girl from The Ring, the one that crawled off from the television. You mean Samara? Or you mean Irma? Or Emiko? Emiko's based off Samara. But then again, they're the same. They're the same yokai. So that's beside the point. I shuddered at the thought, and Simon shot me a suspicious glance. You all right? He asked softly, glancing in the direction of the figures, his eyes unseeing. I waved it off. Yeah, I'm fine. Just go in and say it, I added silently. The front door slammed shut. Simon, who had been the last one in the house, had left it wide open. Ruby was already halfway up the stairs with Danny right behind her. That must have been a gust of wind, she laughed nervously. Sure it wasn't a ghost? Danny asked, completely unconcerned. Danny was lucky. He always appeared happy and content, living in his own little world. It could have been, Ruby answered, not sounding entirely convinced. That wasn't like her. Any opportunity to blame freak happenings on a ghost, she took it. Perhaps I wasn't the only one who was feeling uneasy. That worried me even more. It took a lot to make Ruby nervous. Do we have to go up there? Simon whispered to me nervously. Shall we just leave him to it? I whispered back, motioning towards the shut door. You mean abandon him here? Why not? Can't do that. Two idiots. Get themselves killed. I glanced once more at the figure. It hadn't moved since the moment I had laid eyes on it. I desperately wanted to leave this creepy house and never look back. I turned my head back to the duo, who had nearly made it to the next floor and caught wind of their conversation. You think we'd be able to get a ghost catching net? Danny was asking Ruby. I looked at Simon with my eyebrows raised. Would that really be that bad? Okay. Dry humor. Ha. Simon rolls his eyes and took a hold of my arm, tucking me gently up the stairs. Come on, Carrie. I'm not kidding. Can't leave him alone. Fine. How far am I? 20 minutes. I'm almost halfway. Fine, I groaned, reluctantly letting him drag me up the creaking steps. I wondered whether the wood would even hold out long enough for us to get up the steps. It would just be my luck to be the one who fell through the floor, not the idiots who were previously bounding up, nor Simon who was trying to rush me upwards. I quite like living, you know, I protested, trying in vain to pull my arm from Simon's grip. The upstairs was just as empty as the downstairs, desolate and dirty. Ruby and Danny had already walked into the nearest open door into a large empty room. This was the front of the house. I recognized it almost instantly by the large window that led up onto the balcony. The palace where Ruby's ghost had apparently taken her last breath. Even though the window had been boarded up, moonlight was filtering through the gaps. None of the house had exactly been radiating heat, but this room was freezing. It felt several degrees colder than the rest of the house, perhaps even colder than it had been outside. It's freezing here, Danny shuddered. He was the only one to mention the temperature drop, probably because he couldn't sense the mood of the room. Even the usually brazen Ruby was quiet. She said nothing, glancing warily out of the large window as if she thought the ghost would lunge at her through it. Her genuine worry was up suddenly, so I spoke up. It is cold, I agreed. Don't you think, Ruby? Maybe it's the ghost that's making this room so cold. Ruby answered absentmindedly. Oh, yeah, that's probably it. She managed a small forced smile. You all right? Simon asked, walking over to where she stood and rested a hand on her shoulder. Oh, even Ruby's freaked out. Danley, completely undaunted, asked curiously. How? No. Come on, give me. Right here. Too freaky? How come? Too freaky with you? Too freaky for you? I turned around with a sigh. The antics of my friends temporarily relieved my worries. Sometimes I couldn't believe I was even friends with these weirdos. That's when I saw it again. The figure. Downstairs, I passed it off as my brain over imagining to the environment. Still, nobody seemed to have noticed, so maybe, hopefully that was the cause. It was just my mind playing tricks. I stared at the figure and it stared back at me. His eyes unblinking. My eyes chilled over it. The figure was tall, but stood crouched over slightly, its back bent at an awkward angle. It wasn't wearing the iconic long white dress that so many freaky figures were seen wearing in the horror films. Instead, it was wearing a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt. To my horror, it held a knife in its right hand. I gasped at the sight, causing Danny to spin around. Simon and Ruby were still distracted, but the moment Danny turned around, his eyes landed on the figure, and unlike downstairs, they didn't go right through. He stopped, and for what had to be the first time in his 14 years of life, was completely still as he squinted at the figure. Danny turned his head slightly and noticed me watching him. See this? I nodded my head. Yes, I could see it. It wasn't a figment of my imagination, then how had he not seen it before? Had he missed it the last time? He must have. He was oblivious to everything, so he probably walked right past it. Danny burst out laughing. Ha, that's a great joke, Gary. You've been on this whole time, Ruby? You set this up? Ruby turned at the sound of my name. What the hell is that? Simon's eyes widened. Apparently everyone could see it now, and I was beginning to wonder if it was a good thing or not. Danny only laughed. Okay, funny, okay. Joke's over. Danny, you're gonna get screwed. You're gonna get killed. Danny? I have no idea who that is, Ruby told him with a puzzled expression on her face. The laughter ceased. You don't? Ruby shook her head. Not a clue. Who are you then? Danny addressed the figure who stood at the doorway. hauntingly frozen where it stood. At the sound of his voice, it twitched slightly, his face transforming into a smirk, teeth sharp and pointed, resembling a shark's grin. I think in that moment, the four of us all took a step back together in one swift motion. It took a step forward, red eyes glinting cruelly, eyes focused on me. Danny, you're gonna die. A shriek filled the air, staring all of us but the figure. That's a knife, Danny cried. He's got a knife in his hands. Another step, the slamming of the door. We were all trapped inside the room with a psycho and a knife. For a split second, nobody moved. Everybody held their breaths, waiting. I had always considered myself able to handle emergency situations well. I stay calm. I think the situations through and come up with a solution before things get worse. The speed with which the figure moved didn't give any of us the opportunity to think. Not that it would have made much of a difference. All of us were in a state of panic at that point. As soon as the door was shut, sealing our way out, it lunged directly at me, knife poised and aiming for my heart. I dodged, but only just. Danny was still shrieking, grasping onto Ruby's arm. She pulled him with her as the four of us together ran for the door. Ruby pulled out the handle. It's locked, she yelled at nobody in particular. I could have told you that, I yelled back. Simon swore. Move! The figure lunged again, its grin widening. The knife was still aiming for me as we jumped aside. Ruby and Danny on one side of the room, Simon and I on the other. Oi! Ruby jeered. Oi, ugly! What are you doing? Calm down for a second. Ruby, I don't think that's a wise idea, Simon warned her. The figure paid her no mind. It stood in the middle of the room, eyes glowing, watching me knowingly. It lifted the hand with the knife pointing towards me. What? I asked it neatly. There was four of us in the room, but the only one it seemed to see was me. Why? What had I ever done to this person, this creature? It certainly didn't seem human. Perhaps it was the ghost of the house after all, seeking revenge for my disbelief in its very existence. What was I supposed to do to get the infernal thing off my back? Clap my hands and yell, I do believe in ghosts. I do! Instead of clapping my hands like a lunatic, I stood there frozen to the spot, my mouth gaping open. You, it said, speaking so quietly I could barely hear. Yet at the same time, its gravelly voice resounded the room. It stepped towards me and I couldn't move. It took another step, raising a knife. What do you want with her? It didn't even flinch, but Ruby's shout brought me back to earth with a start. I moved just as it leapt at me. The knife caught the sleeve of my jacket, tearing it and unscratching the top layer of my skin. I had a bad feeling that if we didn't figure a way out of this soon, I wouldn't be so lucky the next time. Not that there seemed to be any urgency to kill me. It was obvious by the look on the creature's face that it was simply toying with us. I racked my brains trying to recall news reports, articles, school self-defense classes, anything that would help me get a knife from the hands of a psycho who didn't even seem human. Or at least fend them off until we managed to break the door down. Ruby, always the idiots who rushed into situations without thinking things through, appeared to be on the same page, or rather a few steps ahead. Danny! Danny flinched back in horror at the sound of her voice, cowering quickly. Danny, try and get the door open. He stood rooted to the spot like I had been moments ago. Now! She shrieked, and you could only just hear a hint of panic in her voice. Danny did as he was told and ran for the door. A wise decision, or else he had been worried more about Ruby than the psycho with a knife, and that was saying something. Ruby's next move, I can say, was a thing of beauty, though certainly not the wisest idea. Courageous, stupid Ruby leapt with all her might at the figure, aiming, I assumed, to tackle them. Instead, she sprung with all her might, flying through and catching him to the floor in a heap. The figure, the ghost, let out a high-pitched shriek of laughter, reminding me of the feeling of nails scraping down a chalkboard. Ruby, I concede, I said as she scrabbled at her feet and spun around, gaping at the barely noticeable translucent figure. I believe you now. There's only one problem. Why is it targeting me? I'm not a boy, and both my older siblings are alive. This is a sick joke, Ruby stuttered. That's all. A sick joke. She stood facing the ghost, staring it down. The ghost lunged at her. I grabbed her and pulled her back quickly. Ruby, don't play the hero, I saw her shoving her away as it targeted me again. Same to you, Simon growled. Playing the hero was the last thing I was thinking about. I wasn't. Before I could finish what I was saying, Simon grabbed me and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. Ruby, get the darn door open, he yelled, momentarily stunning her. Even I was surprised. Simon was normally so calm and quiet. Even in the moments the rest of us would be edging into panic. Despite generally being calm in these situations, he was seldom helpful. preparing to keep quiet and watch the rest of us argue it out. The last time we got lost, he waited until the last possible moment before one of us could explode with anger to say, "We're supposed to go that way," before he casually strolled off, leaving the rest of us spluttering and jogging to catch up with him. Simon let go of me. I shoved him away from me. If the ghosting was targeting me, then my friends were at risk too. The thing I couldn't work out was, why was it targeting me? Simon grabbed me again as the ghost began to edge towards me, pulling me from behind as if his body could shield mine. I pushed him aside quickly. "Get off, Simon." He ignored me and grabbed a hold of me. "Ruby, this is your fault. Get the goddamn door open." "I'm trying," she yelled as she kicked at the door. "Simon," I shoved at him again. This time he held on tight and backed me against the wall so he was protecting me completely. "Simon, what are you doing?" I hissed and tried to push him away. He shifted slightly but stubbornly held tight. What was this idiot doing? I ducked under his arms. He yelped and grabbed a hold of my arm and yanked me back. "Carrie, don't be stupid." "You're the one being stupid," I argued. The silhouette of the ghost fell over us and we glanced up in surprise. Simon was still hanging onto my arms as I tried to tug it away. We froze at the sight of it targeting us silently. It seemed a lot taller than it had before, or perhaps that was merely how we perceived it in out of fear. Right there. His eyes darted from Simon to me, then back to Simon as if it couldn't decide which of us to target. We could only stare, concerned, dead if it decided to act. The fact that the goat was translucent and the thought of throwing ourselves through had occurred to us, much like Ruby had done earlier. Unlike Ruby, the sight of the knife in its hand swayed us into staying put. Finally, its eyes landed on Simon and something in the air shifted. Its target had changed. For the moment, I was off the hook. For a moment, Simon was the one hanging from it. Those deep red eyes widened ever so slightly in what was possibly recognition. I knew it! He's the brother! Like it sensed something familiar in Simon the moment it stopped trying to kill us and took a good look at him. The fact that it stopped trying to kill us for a moment was a good thing. The fact that the ghost was eyeing Simon like a tasty snack was not. "Simon?" "No," he hissed at me. "Ruby, are you having any luck with that door?" I yelled. Ruby, who was so distracted by her attempts to dislodge the door, hadn't followed her ghost friend's change of heart. Danny called back, "I think we got to open a tiny bit more. Try harder, would you?" "Why don't you give it a go?" Ruby snarled, then stopped, noticing what was going on and swore. "Little busy," I gasped as the ghost inched forward. "Back off," I warned it. It grinned and lifted the knife to strike. What happened next so fast, I can hardly remember anything at all. I can hardly remember it happening at all. I shoved Simon away before the blade could fall and tried to move out of the way before it could catch me. I thought it had at first with the adrenaline running through my veins. "You okay?" I asked Simon before quickly jumping out of the way of another slasher attack. He glared at me, obviously angry about what I had done. Apparently, his motto was "do as I say, not as I do." I grinned back weakly, a little proud of myself when I felt a huge twinge on my side. I glanced down and found that there was blood seeping through my shirt. "Ah," I mumbled, reaching down to pull up my shirt. There was a cut on my left side, just above my hip. Not deep enough to have caught any internal organs, I imagine, but not exactly shallow. My hand was quickly covered in blood. I slumped to the floor as the pain grew sharper. "Carrie!" Simon cried out in alarm. At the same time, the ghostly figure started to laugh, harsh and breathless. At least it managed to hit one of its targets. It must have felt pretty pleased with itself. Simon yanked off his jumper and pressed it into my side. "Hold that there," he said. "It should help steam the blood flow. Stem." Get rid of that A right there. Stem the blood flow a bit until we can call an ambulance. "And how exactly do you plan on call an ambulance?" I snapped. "None of us have a mobile phone, and we're trapped in the move with some sort of demon ghost." To say I was panicking was an understatement. Panicking was when we were all running around like headless chicken trying to get the door open. This was at least 3 stages past panicking. I wasn't the only one. "Don't yell at me!" I winced as he pressed his jumper into my side with more force. "What are we gonna do?" I glanced over his shoulder at the ghost. It was still laughing. It reminded me of those idiot villains in films that gloated about their soon-to-be victory but ended up being thwarted by the hero because of it. But there was no hero here, just a frightened group of children. And then Ruby decided she was going to prove me wrong. I noticed her out of the corner of my eye. Danny was still tugging at the door, but Ruby had left her post and was staring directly behind her foe. I thought for a moment that she was going to try the same trick and lunged it, but I noticed that her eyes were focused on the knife it held tightly in his hand. If anyone could get us out of this mess, it was most certainly Ruby. She owned more occult, supernatural, and ghost-related books than the local library did. For the first time, I was grateful for her obsession. If she had a more normal obsession like sports or history, we'd be in trouble. Though there was also the probability that we never would have gotten into this situation in the first place if not for her. The ghost was still cackling, head flung back, mouth open wide so there had been a clear view of his shark-like teeth. Not only did it look completely crazy, but also oblivious. It was so certain there was no way any of us would get away that it was just standing there and laughing in the middle of the room. Ruby was standing behind the figure, hands clenched and softly murmuring to herself. Whether it was some sort of prayer or words of encouragement, I don't know. She caught my eye, winking, and before she could talk herself out of it, she jumped at the ghost, or rather she jumped through the ghost, grabbing the knife right through his hand as she did so. While the ghost was intangible, the knife was as real as anything. Before the ghost could register what had happened, Ruby spun at her heels, knife in her hand, and stabbed right at the ghost's chest. Danny cried out in shock, causing Simon to quickly turn away from me. "Oh my God," he murmured. None of us could believe she had actually done that, especially the ghost that she had impaled. It stopped in the middle of a grating laugh and stared at Ruby, who pulled her hand away quickly and stepped back quickly, uncertain about what might happen. The ghost started to shriek, a horrible noise like that of a wounded animal. Its mouth was wide open, so wide that if it were alive, its jaw would have been completely unhinged. You could see its jagged teeth, and its mouth was a dark black hole. All four of us recoiled as one and clasped our hands over our ears. I thought that this couldn't get much worse when it burst into flames. Shrieking loudly while it seemed to last for an eternity, in reality I was only about 10 seconds until the horrifying ghost vanished into the flames, leaving behind a dark cloud of smoke. Simon and I stared at it in shock. Ruby appeared to be stunned by her own actions. Danny, always the first to recover, started to clap. "Wow, Ruby! That was amazing!" "Yeah," Simon murmured. "Amazing." He turned quickly back to me. "Carrie, we have to get you to a hospital." I went, stabbing the pain in my side, twinging as I tried to sit up. "I second that." I frowned as the dark cloud started to fade. "Wait, what is that?" Beneath the cloud, another figure started to appear. "No, not another one." Ruby cornered, tired of Jost. "I never thought I'd see the day," I mumbled, trying to sit up again, only to have Simon push me carefully back down by the shoulder. "Carrie, stay," he told me softly. I could already see that the figure was different from the previous terrifying ghost. This one was glowing softly and was quite obviously translucent. It didn't have glowing red eyes or a cruel grin. It was a woman with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She was floating just above the ground. When she turned, she wore a soft smile. "Oh," she said, startled to see the group of terrifying-looking teachers staring at her. "Hello!" Her voice was surprisingly cheerful in the gloomy, dark room that may very well have been the last thing we ever saw. Hello?" Danny replied, and she grinned at him. "Is that?" I started to ask. "No, it's not possible." "What are you two mumbling about?" Ruby was staring at the new ghost with awe. "It's my sister," sounding choked up. "Marianne." At the sound of her name, Marianne turned, her eyes widening as they met Simon's. "Oh," she said softly. "Simon." "What's going on?" I could hear Simon growing frustrated. "I don't understand. I never thought I was going to see you again." Sorry about that. Marianne floated down to hover in front of Simon, making Ruby retreat backwards quickly. Simon squeezed my shoulder gently before he stood up to meet his sister. "I don't understand," he repeated, sounding dazed. "Sorry, I guess this must be a bit of a shock." "A bit?" Simon asked. "A bit? How are you here? Were you trying to kill us?" Marianne's smiling face sobered. "No, I wasn't. What you saw wasn't me. It was a parasite of sorts." "A parasite?" Ruby asked, brow furrowed. "A ghost possessing a ghost?" "That's it," Marianne answered, still sounding far too cheerful. "I think it took us all off guard. Ruby's tales of ghosts always spoke of tragedy, of the deceased haunting the places of their death, angry for vengeance on those who had done them wrong, who had been responsible for their deaths." Simon let out a sob. "Are you here? In this house?" Marianne tilted her head to the side, her long blonde hair shimmering. "You mean rather than being in some sort of heaven?" "I mean, why are you stuck inside this horrible house?" Simon cried. "This isn't even where you died." Marianne looked confused. "But it is. I mean, not inside this house, but down the road." This is all my fault. You were trying to find me. I was almost glad I couldn't see Simon's face. I could hear in his voice he was crying. What, Simon? No, it wasn't your fault. You're only a kid. But if I hadn't run off, Marianne started to shake her head rapidly from side to side. You don't understand. It really wasn't your fault. It wasn't an accident. That parasite was the reason I died. But you got hit by a car. Wait, I thought the ghost of this house died from falling off a balcony. I couldn't believe the audacity of that girl. Ruby, I hissed. Not the time. Rumors to make the house seem freakier than it already is, Marianne answered with a shrug. It was already haunted by another ghost, the parasite. Whoever that was, they died here a long time ago and went mad. And that had what to do with you, Simon asked his sister. Doesn't it feel like a conversation we should be listening on, Danny murmured as they slid down the door, his energy running out. I wasn't surprised after everything that had happened. He was right, though. A reunion between Simon and his sister wasn't something that should have had an audience. The fact that Marianne was a ghost was just completely surreal. There was something you never knew about me, Marianne explained. I was able to see ghosts since the day I was born. I see dead people. Insert all the Sixth Sense jokes in the comment section below. Insert I want to see one comment saying I see dead people. Just one. Did I get one? Just like her father. I saw him only once after he died, and he told me everything about what I am, or rather, what I was when I was alive. She stopped, waiting for a member of the audience to ask. What were you? I asked, unable to help myself. Her bright blue eyes met mine, and she beamed at me. Her face was pale and unearthly. She was like a creature from another world. I was a diviner. A diviner asked at the same time. Simon jumped in. Wait, like Dad? Marianne glanced between them. Yes, Dad was the same. It actually runs in families. Diviners have rare souls. They are much more than the average psychic. Not only can they see spirits, but control them. This, unfortunately, can attract ghosts. Often vengeful ones who fear being controlled, and then she gestured to herself. This happens, and their souls can be possessed by others. Just how many diviners are there? Ruby asked, interest plagued. How come I never heard of them? I mean, I've heard of psychics, obviously, but not this particular brand. Oh, fan of the supernatural, are we? Marianne looked as if she was having the time of her life with the attention she was getting from all of us. I don't know how many. It's not like there's a society. I can tell you one thing, though. There's a reason that parasite was so attracted to your little group. I thought that was because of the story about the ghost searching for your lost brother, Simon. Isn't that what happened, Ruby asked, glanced between the siblings. Simon was still watching his sister in fascination. Marianne narrowed her eyes at Ruby, as if she was wondering what kind of crazy she was dealing with. That probably confused it, she answered finally. But no, it's because it sensed a diviner among you. I groaned in pain, or maybe annoyance. Who? Ruby asked eagerly. Tell us. Oh, you'll see. She grinned, winked, and nothing happened, at least from my point of view. Everyone else started to make noise around her while she hovered above ground, staring at me with a happy little grin. Where'd she go? Ruby shrieked. Where? Danny gasped while Simon made a choked sound and started to twist his body around. I watched my friends from where I was half sitting, half laying on the ground, and couldn't believe their stupidity. She's right there, I said without thinking about the repercussions might be, having only been half listening to the conversation. Where? Simon asked in an almost pleading tone. Right there, I nodded my head towards her. She never moved. Are you guys blind? I groaned again. I really needed to get my side seen too. I was starting to feel faint. Marianne's grinned wide and my friend stared at me. I looked at them and at the ghost. I thought about how I was the only one who had seen the figure beforehand and how, before Simon got in the way and confused it, it had been aiming for me. Oh no, I said and immediately passed out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, laying in one of the many hospital beds with Simon's head resting beside me. My side hurt like hell, and I guess I had to have stitches, but at least I was alive and far away from that creepy house. I remembered everything that had happened the moment I opened my eyes, and I knew that it hadn't been a dream. There could be no more denial, no more skepticism. Ruby and her ridiculous notion of ghosts had been correct, and I could see them when no one else could. Everything had changed. I groaned as I pushed myself up with my arms. Hi! I clasped my hands over my mouth before I could let out a shriek at the sight of Marianne leaning over me. Her blonde hair fell over her shoulder. I had never thought about the features a ghost might have, but I was wondering, did their clothes crinkle as they moved? Did their hair blow in the wind? What the hell are you doing here? I gasped out. Waiting for you to wake up, of course. Her tone clearly implied I had asked a stupid question. I simply gaped at her. Wait, did you think being reunited with my dear younger brother would help me move on to whatever afterlife there might be? No. I'm just confused about why you were waiting for me to wake up. Seems legit. Oh! Marianne glanced towards Simon with a frown. You know, your other two friends are in the hospital cafe. But your parents, they said they'd be here when you woke up. Yeah, they're really busy, I explained. I'm not surprised. They'll get here eventually. Marianne continued to frown a moment longer before she stood up. Well, I say stood up, but she was still hovering a few inches off the ground. Come on. Where? To the bathroom. Why can't we talk here? I don't want to wake Simon up. I'm so worried. Does he know you're here? No. Fine, I sighed. I followed the ghost of Marianne into one of the patient's private bathrooms. Well, why are you still here? For you. I sat down on the edge of a toilet seat. Me? Diviners like you and me are rare spirits. Rare and endangered. Many ghosts like the one you encountered earlier fear us. First moment they get, she snapped her fingers. You're dead. Okay. That wasn't making me feel any better. She was basically telling me that my chances of survival were pretty low. Diviners, as I said before, do not merely see ghosts, but can also learn to control them. It can either be through force or voluntary. Ghosts fear being manipulated through force. So I'm not going to do that. I don't want anything to do with ghosts. I didn't believe in them until earlier. I know that, Marianne said kindly, but it doesn't matter to them. If spirits catch a whiff of you, that's it. Thank you for your comforting words, I muttered. They're not meant to be comforting, Carrie. You have to understand the risk. Proof enough of that. So you're telling me I'm doomed to die young, I asked her. I'm telling you I'm going to prevent that from happening, Marianne announced proudly. How? I asked after a beat of silence. How could you do that? Do you remember what I said? It doesn't have to be through force. I can stay with you voluntarily. Allow you to control me and use my ghostly powers if you wish to. I would stay with you for as long as you wanted and protect you. I consider this. What about you? Me? She frowned. What about me? Exactly. What about you? Why would you want to stick around here and watch everyone else grow up and move on? Wouldn't that be so sad? Marianne was sitting, hovering in midair with her legs crossed. Her face was even with mine. She regarded me curiously. I suppose some would see it that way. She replied, twisting a blonde curl around her finger. I think it would be nice to watch over my brother and my family. I leant forward on my makeshift chair, but it's not the same as being with them. No, but I get peace and quiet I never got in life. Eternal youth and great power. No, it's better than nothing. Yeah, it's like, it's probably better than nothing. I didn't think I would ever be able to do that without feeling envy, even anger towards the living. Mary had been so young as well. She had such a bright future. She smiled as if she knew what I was thinking. I want to stay because there are so few diviners. I don't want the same thing to happen to you. But when I'm ready, I can move on. I nodded. Okay. Marianne leant forward so we were face to face. Besides, I'll feel good to know that I'll be looking after my brother's girlfriend. Don't you think? I choked on my own spit. At first, I thought you were close friends. Friends can mean as much as someone as a romantic partner, but Simon has such a dopey expression whenever he looked at you. That, and while you were passed out, he basically professed his undying love to you. That must have been a new step in your relationship. Yes, I answered dryly, certain she was being overly melodramatic. Quite a big step. Well, either way, I think I'll be happy to stay around here for a while. After being trapped so long, it'd be nice to explore the town, see what's changed. I couldn't work out whether Marianne was either very skilled at hiding her emotions or she was just this laid back. I decided to get back to the previous conversation. It meant I would be able to live, then I'd happily keep her around. She was certainly a character. So, do I have to bind you to be or something? Yeah, there's a contract involved to connect the two of us, but that can wait until you're out of the hospital. We'll talk more about then. Deal? Deal, I agreed. Marianne smiled brightly again. I shake your hand, but she waved a translucent hand in my face. Does Simon know you're here? Marianne shook her head. For the moment, no. He was too distracted by you passing out to think about me. I can tell him what's happening, right? Later, she said. Later, we can sort everything out. When I walked back into the ward, Simon was awake and alert, looking around for me. I limped in, feeling pretty pathetic. From what the nurse had told me, I stayed unconscious as they stitched up my side. It was nothing serious. How far am I? Oh, almost 15 minutes. But it would have been better had I gone to the hospital sooner. They were keeping me overnight for observation. My parents were picking me up in the morning. As soon as he saw me, Simon rushed over and took my hand. I could almost feel Marianne smirking as she hovered behind me. Are you okay? He asked as he led me back to the hospital bed. I sat on the edge, and he sat back in the chair he'd fallen asleep in. He was still holding my hand. I'll live, I said with a smile. I'm glad, Simon smiled back. Marianne snorted and laid back on the bed. I gave her a quick glare, causing Simon to frown and start to ask something, which I was guessing was about Marianne. I never got to find out. Before he could say a word, there was a loud whoop as Ruby rounded the corner, Danley following closely behind as Ruby's ever-faithful psychic. Carrie is finally awake! Ruby exclaimed so loudly that I was sure the entire hospital must be aware of my status. We were waiting hours for your triumphant return, she continued dramatically. Does she ever shut up? Marianne muttered to me. Is the amateur ghost hunter? She crossed the element of surprise off her list of techniques. I had to cover a laugh, quickly turning into a cough. I couldn't tell if I was going to be good having Marianne around or not. I could imagine sitting in exam and having Marianne make snide comments. I wouldn't be able to stop myself from laughing out loud. Or it wouldn't even be just Marianne. I would see ghosts whenever there were ghosts to be seen, the good and the bad. If that was going to be anything like some of the horror movies I've seen, it wasn't going to be pretty. Or maybe there wasn't actually an abundance of ghosts like it always appeared. Marianne, after all, had been the first ghost I have ever seen, at least that I could remember. Ruby sat herself down beside me. Carrie, I'm glad you're okay, but there's one thing I wanted to tell you. As I sat in the hospital, surrounded by my friends, 3 living and 1 deceased, I felt lucky. No matter what happened in the future, I would be able to deal with it because I had them, whether the supernatural was involved or it was simply the trials and tribulations of life. These people were my family. Everything would be okay in the end. What did you want to tell me? I asked. I grinned and sent Simon a wink. He grinned back. We knew exactly what she wanted to say. Danny started to laugh before she even had the words out. Marianne leant over my shoulder. Ghosts exist, Ruby said proudly. I told you so. So that's the ghost of Marianne. I actually want to check something before I talk about the story. I want to see, is there more to the story? Because this looks like it's like the start of a whole series rather than it's going to be a one-off. Because I actually want to see more of it. No, it's the newest story. Yeah, I actually want to see more of the story. Isn't it weird that I just honestly want to see more of the story? This actually seems like a very good idea for a story series. It kind of sort of reminds me of the Ghost Whisperer, but at the same time, it's more dealing with horror aspects rather than mystery. Because Ghost Whisperer was a crime show rather than horror stories. So I can actually see this kind of being sort of like Ghost Whisperer, but other than not. I do like the cast. You have Carrie, who's the skeptic, who kind of turns out to be, she's able to see ghosts, and now she has to deal with the fact that she has like a little ghost girl hanging around her, just saying, "Hey, how you doing? I'm a ghost." No, I have to deal with all that. You have Ruby, who's just the ridiculous one. I wish we could have gotten descriptions of all the characters so we know what they look like. That's literally my only complaint about the story. Other than that, I actually have to give it a 4. You know what? I will split it. I will add an asterisk to this. If it's a single story, like this story is going to be taken by itself, I'll give it a 4. However, if it's a start of a literature series, like we have like a group of stories kind of just going around these group of characters, I will raise it to a 5. Because this is a good story as a launching off point for more stories in a series. I really like what the author done. It was so simple in execution. It was a drama story, with her having to learn, that she can see ghosts and being a diviner. The horror aspect of, the killer ghost, just scraping at them in like a small balcony room. I mean, balcony's not a big room. There's not much room you can do. You can walk around. Everything was paced fine. There was a couple grammar errors. The characters are actually pretty great. They all have defined characters. You have Carrie, the septic, who has this burden of personality. You have Ruby, this bombastic, I'm guessing, punk girl. I'm guessing because whenever I think of Ruby, I think of like a punk girl. I don't know why. That just seems to be what I think of. You had Danny, who's like the jokester, who doesn't take everything seriously. You had Mary Ann, who's like the laid back, I'm guessing, lazy person, who's like, I'll deal with it later. And you have, who is, god dang it. And Simon, who's like a quiet guy, who's kind of crushing on Carrie. All the characters were done perfectly. I have no complaints. Outside of, I wish I knew what they looked like. And that's really all I have to say. There's really not much to say. I really do like the story. I actually wish it gotten more hold on, it doesn't even have any reviews. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. So I guess this is Space the Ghost's first review. And I really like it. I'll give it a 4. If the author planning on writing another story, I'll give it a 5. I'll make it a 5. But that'll be the only way I'll make it a 5. If this story is continued somehow, some way. So this has been Dark Symphony 777 with my reading of The Ghost of Mary Ann, and cut.